introduction. So my name is Matt. I'm Matt Spurway. I'm the Executive Director and founder of GEO Nova Scotia, which stands for Getting Everyone Online. And I will be today's host for this discussion. And I appreciate the help from my colleague, our communications lead, Ashley, who may pop in to say hi. There's Ashley. Thanks, Ashley. Ashley will help monitor the chat and any other issues with the Zoom technology. And now I'd like to introduce you to my other colleague who will be speaking today, Carrie Patterson, our learning and evaluation lead, to tell you a little bit more about a special blog and report that's coming out very soon for you to engage with. Carrie?
Thanks, Matt, and hi, everybody. On behalf of GEO Nova Scotia, I'm thrilled to share that we've just launched our evaluation and learning blog. Are you asking yourself why this is so exciting? I'll tell you why it's so exciting. Because it's a space where we can share our evaluation findings and information about what we're learning. We can share stories about what getting online means in people's lives. Everyone can participate. You can add your thoughts and experiences and your questions and stories. And we can learn together by having conversations and exchanges and building on each other's insights. We want this to be a brave space where we can be honest about trying new things, figuring out what works, and learning from things that fall flat. The first thing we shared on our new blog is our 2023-2024 evaluation and learning report, and I want to show you that. Show you the blog first. So there's the blog. And here's the learning report, which you can click on from the blog. So as we say in the blog, this is not your traditional evaluation report. It's a big story with lots of different chapters, and it's all tied together through a beautiful illustration that allows you to click on the parts that you want to explore. There are impacts, learnings, stories, vignettes, reflections, and love and kindness. So in the next couple of days, we're going to be posting some highlights and reflections about today's discussion and the lessons learned from our friends in the UK that could help our digital inclusion work here in Nova Scotia, and we'll invite you all to join the conversation. So if you have a question or idea that doesn't get addressed today, or if you think of something after, don't worry, there'll be a place for all that. You'll be getting a link to the blog in your follow-up email. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carrie. So before we introduce our panelists today, you might be wondering to yourself how such an amazing group of folks from the UK ended up here virtually talking to us in Nova Scotia. Well, if you aren't aware of our history with GEO, we've been around for almost 5 years, and for about 4 of them, we've been well connected with friends in the UK who have been carrying along similar work. It started with Connecting Scotland and SCVO, the Scottish Council of Volunteer Organizations, who we met early on in our origin story. We were quickly connected with some wonderful people who are here today at the More Collective, who have been sharing their programming and digital champions work and digital skill building material and methodologies with us to bring their learnings over here. And as recently as October at the GEO Forum 2024, our first kind of virtual conference, our one-day event, we had a plenary all-Scottish panel, and some other folks took part in other discussions later on. So there's been a lot of back and forth. We're always learning from them. And now here we are with this incredible group talking about the minimum digital living standard. Some research, a lot of research and work coming out of the UK that's getting a lot of attention and driving a lot of the conversation around digital inclusion. So obviously very interesting to us. And today we have 3. We were supposed to have 4, but unfortunately Emma Stone had to send her regrets for some family matters. But we still have 3 key people who are largely responsible for this research and work here with us today. So we're going to be hearing a lot more from them. And before we hand it over to them, I just want to give you a heads up that what we're going to do today is break up this presentation to make room for questions from the audience as we go. So we'll talk a little bit and we'll ask some questions and we'll talk some more and then we'll ask some more questions. We got 3 rounds of that. So when the time comes, please use the chat to post your questions. And remember, as Carrie said, we will have the blog as a forum to continue this conversation for anything that we don't get to today. Now, let's hand it over to our guests, the reason why we're all here, so they can introduce themselves and their involvement in this work And from there, I'm going to ask them just to jump right into the topic, and starting off by explaining why they developed the minimum digital living standard, and how, some methodology about how they did that. And then we will go to our first round of questions. So over to you, Simeon.
Hi, everybody. Normally Emma does the kind of start off thing, so you're missing Emma's initial start energy that she gives to this, and unfortunately family health issue has meant she can't be here today. So thank you for having us on the other side of the Atlantic. I hope you can hear as well. We're very quickly just going to introduce ourselves and our organizations, and then I'm going to do a little bit on why we developed it, and then, as has just been said, Chloe and Katherine will talk a little bit about the methodology, because it draws heavily on the work they do there at CRISP in Loughborough in Britain, and then I think we're going to our first break. So I'm going to try the share slides thing, and I think I am official slide clicker today. So let me check that's worked. Can everyone see that? Can someone give me a...
We've got your desktop, Simeon. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, we got it. Yeah, good. Right. Okay. So you can see this.
I think that's the presenter
We're your
view.
presenter mode. Yeah.
Oh, that is
So
not
if you're on
what...
two screens, I think it's...
Yeah, no, 1 minute. Let me click that again. Stop share. Start Zoom. And share slide. Is that better?
Nothing yet. Oh, got on a delay. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
That's better, isn't it?
Nice.
Yeah, right. So minimum digital living standards, just to introduce ourselves, I will obviously talk through where Emma comes from shortly, but to kick off, I'm Simeon Yates. I'm Professor of Digital Culture at the University of Liverpool. Say that more clearly, Professor of Digital Culture, University of Liverpool. And I've been doing work on digital inclusion, exclusion, digital society for most of my career, but digital inclusion in particular, or digital exclusion, since the early 2000s, working with all sorts of organizations, government, local government, and other academic organizations, with a particular kind of focus on the extent to which digital exclusion causes or is tied to other aspects of inequality and exclusion. I'm the joint lead of a relatively new research institute at Liverpool that we've just set up called the Digital Media and Society Institute, whose focus is on the social impacts of digital media. So if I click on now, it should say Loughborough, but it's not showing your text very well. But anyway.
It's combined, for some reason, it's combined Emma's slide from Good Things with our Loughborough University slide. That's interesting.
Oh, it's backgrounds.
I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, so if I just speak to it instead. Yeah, so there's me, Chloe Blackwell, and there's Katherine Hill as well. Hopefully she can give us a wave. We're working at Loughborough University. We've got CRISP by our names, so CRSP, Centre for Research in Social Policy. We conduct applied social research, which relates to the areas of poverty, living standards more generally. So you can see where the LS, the living standard, comes into the digital project. And we look at things like income adequacy as well. But it's particularly a methodology that we use. That's the reason why we were brought into this project. That's all I'll say there from me.
Okay. And the Good Things Foundation, which is Emma Stone, who's not here today. The Good Things Foundation is the largest digital inclusion charity in the UK. They predominantly support other organisations in their large network to deliver training support. They run the National Data Bank and the National Device Bank, which again are things in collaboration with corporate partners like Virgin Media O2, etc., who provide them with SIM cards, which they can then distribute out to people, and working with other organizations to get recycled equipment, which they can then give out to people and organizations. So they form a network, and they support other organizations whilst also being advocates and working closely with researchers to deliver research. So that's 3 of us who are presenting here today. Now, just to say, the MDLS project is not just the 3 of us. Along the way, we've worked with a whole range of other people. Our main funder, the Nuffield Foundation, other funders, the Welsh Government, Scottish Government, Nominet, who look after the .uk bit of all British web addresses, as well as collaborators from within University of Liverpool, within University of Loughborough, who aren't here today, and other universities in the UK, and so on. So it's a big team that has delivered this. Okay, so why are we doing this was the question that was asked. Well, you know, there's a problem we all have with defining what the thing is. You know, we talk about digital inclusion or digital exclusion, whereas actually people also talk about digital divides, ICT divides, information divides, and so on. These are all terms that people use. So when we're talking to policymakers, especially, and delivery organizations, it's often a challenge just to define what the thing is. You know, is it simply just not having broadband? Is it simply just not having device? Is it not having skills? And then there's the consequences of it, you know, the consequences of inequality, or the consequences of not having access, knowledge, skills, the risks, and so on. And lastly, the more positive thing about, you know, engaging with a new world that is digital. And in all of these things, we can measure differences and divides in all sorts of different ways around access, skills, levels and types of use, and so on. So quite a long time ago, Emma and I were discussing this and thinking about how we could get some more funded research to look at this challenge of measuring this and understanding this in the whole rather than in its parts. And from her prior work at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Emma knew about the colleagues at Loughborough and how they approached the question of minimum income standards, minimum living standards. And we thought we could combine the 2 approaches and the 2 types of topics together and ask, what is a minimum digital living standard instead? Rather than kind of trying to put people into binary groups, which are the kind of stuff I've done before, or into different groups, limited users, experience, whatever, actually kind of understand what the needs of households were of different types and in different places, in different combinations, to actually get a more rounded grip on the whole thing. And also because it's about lived experience. This is a slide I've used many times. At one time, I was running a project on digital arts, and we were putting on digital arts performances in city centres, you know, and people with thousands of pounds worth of kit would run past homeless people. You know, the contrast in those 2 different kind of lived experiences of potentially holding on to a mobile phone because it's your only connection, and somebody running past covered but in literally 4 mobile phones to run an online digital arts event. And at the same time, there's a British film, I, Daniel Blake, which was about navigating the benefits system. And in it, there are multiple occasions where digital skills and the lack of them and the lack of support impact that experience of trying to engage with the welfare and benefits system. So we wanted to get that lived experience kind of bit in there as well. Hence, we wanted something that was not just a list of kit and broadband speeds, but that involved the public in its definition and in its consultation and in its development, focusing on a standard that citizens themselves think they need, right? And the initial idea was a basket of goods, skills, and services that you would need as a household to be digitally included. So that's why we put the proposal together, got the funding, put the team together, and we've been doing this project. So if I can now hand over to, I shall just do the Good Things thing. And the other reason Good Things want to do this is Good Things, like I said, run all these things, the National Device Bank, the National Data Bank, and so on. And each year they produce an infographic like this to try and communicate to policymakers all the various issues and the various things that you can think about, measure, assess as a result of digital exclusion. It is a very complicated story to tell. And one of the reasons for doing the MDLS is to be able to talk a little bit more, as I said, holistically about how all of these issues are connected. Less lots of numbers and more kind of one kind of concept. So I've done that. So this is where I hand over to Chloe and Katherine, and they will talk you through how they developed the core measure that we've used, or the core definitions that we've used for the minimum digital living standard. Tell me when to flick on.
Yeah. So
yeah.
next view,
There
that's
we
it, and that's it. Good. Yeah. Hi. So my name is Chloe. I work at Loughborough University, and we came on board for. Sorry about this slide. There's a lot going on. Look at the middle bit. So where there are these coloured arrows, we've got stage 1, stage 2, 3, and 4. Starting with the orientation group. Another word for orientation would be development stage or development. And that's the bit I want you to remember as I go through the next few slides. But at a glance, this is just to demonstrate to you, just to show what is possible around the edges, but at the core of the research, we have the MDLS consultative groups. These are bottom-up groups or inductive research with members of the public. So this is what Sim keeps referring to, is this sort of, if we want to know, for example, what households with children need for digital inclusion, we should consult households with children, which would include talking to young people and talking to parents. So that's what's at the core of this. So this is the colourful bit in the middle. It's at the core. And then these blue boxes, which highlight things like a UK-wide in-person survey, the statistical analysis that can show us some indications of where people are in terms of, are they reaching MDLS or not in some ways. Our stakeholder work and sessions, further work that we can do then with, for example, with Wales, with Scotland. All of these things are what's possible and very important, but at the core are these focus groups. So I just want you to remember from this very text heavy slide, these colourful bits. So the orientation stage, because the orientation this is where we develop the definition. And it's a really, really crucial and important part of the research that we keep coming back to. It all comes around to this beginning bit where we talk to members of the public, we talk to young people, we talk to parents, for example. And they help us develop the definition. Not only did we speak to parents and young people, we spoke to people from different household types as well, because we didn't want a definition that's just for one household type. So for example, we spoke to people of pensionable age, so people who may be retired or certainly eligible for receiving pensions. And we also spoke to people who are of working age, but without dependent children, because they might see digital inclusion slightly differently. Once we have a definition of what people need, we can take it then to a further series of groups where their task is not to go around the houses again and decide what digital inclusion is, but based off a publicly defined minimum digital living standard, what are then the contents? What do we need to meet that standard? So if we just go to the next slide, please, Sim. These are some key principles of the research. And I just want to draw your attention to the first 4. So we have these phrases or these words. We have bottom up, benchmark, holistic, and starting point. I want you to remember those. So this is, as I've said, a bottom-up piece of research. So what we mean by that is it consults members of the public about things that are important to them. It sets a benchmark. So with this research, what you can do is you can then look at where people are at it gives you that potential, it gives you that possibility then to look at where people are at. If this is a publicly defined minimum, then how do households in certain situations compare? And also it's holistic, and this is important. So as Sim was explaining at the beginning, definitions, well, funnily enough, definitions that are more top down, where experts have sort of decided this is what we think people need to be digitally included. They're usually partial, which is what Sim was explaining. So this is holistic, as you'll see in the coming up definition that they helped to develop. It includes, if you look at this house on the right, we've got this top level that says critical skills. We've got this middle level that says functional and practical skills, and the bottom level, which is digital goods and services. It considers all of these things in combination. And the point I'll just finish on here is that we describe this research as a starting point. So I showed you that at the core, we have these MDLS groups with members of the public, but actually then there's so much more you can do with that, and you can have conversations with people, you can have conversations with stakeholders about how, what does this mean for implementation or measuring as an organisation that's interested in digital inclusion, where are they at, or where are households at? It helps you to do further qualitative work, such as interviews, to investigate how families experience certain elements of digital exclusion, or possibly things that would help for their inclusion. So we're going to remember bottom up, benchmark, holistic, and a starting point. So if we go to the next slide, Sim. This is the definition. So this was what we developed by talking to people. They said a minimum digital living standard includes, and it's all these things, so holistic, having accessible internet, adequate equipment, and the skills and knowledge people need. But more than that, it's about being able to communicate, connect, and engage with opportunities safely and with confidence. So the top bit is about what you need to have, adequate equipment, accessible internet, skills and knowledge. And the second bit is equally important, because actually digital inclusion is not just for the sake of digital inclusion. It's about what does it enable you to do. It's about being able to communicate, connect, and engage. So basically it's about being able to participate and feel a part of the world now. And again, I just think this does really encapsulate those things, you know, the fact that this was bottom up, and look at the great definition you can get by consulting members of the public and not overlooking them. You can get this holistic sort of approach that we think is very positive. If we want to look at how a definition like this can help us with some kind of benchmark, then it's a different what question. It's not what is a minimum digital living standard, what is digital inclusion? It's this next sort of question on the next slide, Sim. It's what is enough? That's another what question. What is enough then? So if that's the definition of digital inclusion, how do you get there? What's enough? And I'm not going to go into the detail of the findings yet, because we just want to help you process the first bit, because we know this is very text heavy and I'm probably talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But at a glance, these are the principles. So you can see how the outcome, the discussion we can have with further groups, the outcome can be holistic because the definition was holistic. So then we can talk to to groups. We can talk to them about the types of devices, because it's about having the adequate goods. We can ask them, what are adequate goods, how many, and so on. We can ask about skills. We could break those skills down into functional, practical skills, and also looking at more critical skills. And when I use the word critical, I don't mean they're more important or they're the most critical ones. I mean critical thinking. So evaluating what we see online, which is a big part of the skill set that we need as well. And that's what we could discuss with subsequent groups, and we'll give you the kind of results of that at a glance in a moment. But for now, that's me.
Okay. Just to say, if we're doing methodology as well, I'll just do what we did with the results. So if you followed the story so far, Chloe and Katherine and colleagues have spent a good part of nearly a year, I think, doing multiple rounds of groups, getting the definition, asking what those lists should be for the skills and the whatever, getting that sense checked again with the public and getting that sense checked again with the public in different stages until that list of goods and services, which we'll tell you about in a moment, got signed off. And then we used those to do a big national survey, and we looked at, and this was an in-person survey, so we weren't going to miss out on the people who were not online, etc., and so on, where we went to 1,500, just over 1,500, nearly 1,600 households in the UK, nationally representative. We know from various analysis that it's a very good sample. And that covered over 2,500 adults, some further other adults, one household, nearly 1,000 secondary school children, 1,000 primary school children, and 700 preschool children. And we used that to do the analyses we'll tell you about later, where we had a look at who was meeting the standard that had been set by this deliberative process that Chloe has just walked through. And then the next thing we did was we took that data and we drew some maps of the UK to highlight where in the UK people were above and below this definition. So, which areas of the UK people were more likely to be meeting the definition, areas of the UK where people were less likely to meet the definition. And we did that by looking at the demographics of the areas where we'd done the survey and matching those across the UK. So that's the first bit. That's how we did it. And I think that's the point at which we're supposed to do our first pause. So sorry, I got a little mangled over the slides from Emma. I hadn't quite prepped which bits from Emma I was supposed to speak in which order, but anyway, they were all there. Yes, I think we're pausing. Matt,
yeah, that's great. Thank you, Simeon. If you want to take the share off your screen for a moment, I will bring ourselves back to the people view. So we're looking for questions from the audience about why and methodology. So why do the MDLS and about the wonderful story we heard about how it was done. The first questions in the chat come from Steph. My user researcher brain is wondering, A, how did you all find the folks? So I guess that would be the ground up folks that you spoke with. And B, what were the ethical considerations working with children?
Yeah, do you want me to take this one? Yeah, hi, I'm Katherine. I'm working alongside Chloe on this. So how did we find the people who took part in the groups? And there were a lot of groups. I think there were about 17 groups in all, of about between 8 and, or probably between about 7 and 10 people per group. We used a sort of professional recruitment company. This is the sort of work that we do as a research centre. It's our core work. We do something called the minimum income standard, which we constantly do in groups, looking at people's needs for minimum standard of living income wise. So we're adopting the same approach. So we're using the same methodology. It included people across different areas of the UK. So that's how the groups were found. In terms of the ethical considerations, we had a different approach with that in terms of young people. So we used our sort of networks and got a few schools on board. So we just used these for secondary school aged children, which would be aged 11 upwards. So I think we included children from age about 11 to about 16 in the groups for this. So we sort of did that off our own back, just sort of contacted a school, explained what we were going to do. Obviously, anything to do with children, there are ethics. We go through an ethics committee. We had an ethics submission as part of our university. So you have various consent forms. You have to get parent consent forms and So we have to go through all those processes, understandably. So that's how, that's how it came about.
Thanks, Katherine. Chloe or Simeon, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, obviously, Chloe and Katherine and the Loughborough team are the ones who did this qualitative deliberative field work. So yes, that was I mean, on the finding the folks for the survey, again, we used a national company that does survey work. We use the same company that the media regulator Ofcom uses for much of its national research. They do multiple large-scale in-person surveys for Ofcom every year. They've worked with me on my surveys for a decade now, and so they're kind of specialists around digital and media literacy type research. They understand the importance of getting to households who will not be online, households where people have got low digital skills. So it's a boots on the ground kind of survey process of identifying areas of the UK that represent different demographic groups and getting respondents from those different areas. And it's an in-person, they sit with the person with a laptop and do the survey in home. So it's a fairly laborious but high quality way of collecting the data.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. Can I?
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Simeon.
I saw the other question. I don't know whether Chloe or Katherine want to jump in.
We're running a little low on
Okay.
time for our next section.
Right. So I think the one thing that's there is about the generalized definition and the intersectionality. That will come out in the next bit. I just want to say that, not to ignore.
There's some great questions there. If you want to pull your screen up for the next section, I'll point out to folks, there's a few other questions there. Kamal asking about the general definition for MDLS and specialization. As Simeon mentions, that's going to turn up a bit later. Carrie asking about findings regarding people who weren't connected and their understanding or appreciation of those implications, and a great question from Cheryl about the survey itself. So some of that may come up in the conversations yet to come. Others may be answered in the chat. And again, we've got our blog afterwards. So let's go into the next section now. We're going to get our guests to now dig into the findings for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to come back for questions about this section. So I think, Katherine, are you kicking this off?
I think it might be me. Yeah, it's me for the next
Chloe.
one.
Okay, thanks.
Hi again, sorry. So at a glance, and again, I apologise for this kind of text-heavy slide. I want you to keep left for now, so everybody just concentrate on the left-hand side of these slides. This, because on the left-hand side is what comes out of the focus groups in terms of answering that what question. So do you remember when I said we have the definition, and then using the definition, what do you then need to be digitally included according to that definition? This also links to somebody's question about, is this a generalized definition, and so on and so on. We were specifically talking to, as a starting point, households with children. So for households with children, using that definition, what is then needed? And they could talk to us about, if I'm showcasing what's possible with the methodology, they could talk about what is needed, the quantity of those things. So for example, is it acceptable to share a large screen device in a household? They said yes, until you have additional school-age children, because then you'll need another device with each school-age child. You can have those kinds of conversations. So how many, but also why? Why are these things needed? And this is the bit that's equally crucial. It's not just what and how many, it's why. Why are all these things needed? And you can see how this fits with hopefully with the definition, because actually this is about what it enables you to do and participating in the world around you, which isn't in the definition, but that communication, connect, and engage. All of those things are about participation, aren't they? So they included things that are about participation. So then on the right hand side, we've got stuff on the far right, which comes out of the sort of survey results. And then in the middle, we have like a mix of qualitative stuff. So that those quotes from the focus groups, and of course you could conduct interviews and get quotes about that from families and things like that as well, or stakeholder interviews. So if we circulate these after, you can look at these in more depth. But I just wanted to draw your attention to this is what this is demonstrating, are those different things that you can find out. But as we know, MDLS is not just about the equipment or the goods and services. There are more elements to this. So if Sim just goes on to the next slide for us quickly, we could look at functional skills. This is quite interesting when you compare it to other definitions that we have in the UK of the sorts of skills that, for example, Department for Education might recommend, or, you know, the sorts of skills that they're trying to make sure that people have. They don't necessarily break it down into such an everyday sort of level. It's almost as if these very super obvious things can get missed. So it's quite interesting when you consult everyday people in their everyday lives. They might struggle with this equally, but actually you have that opportunity to discuss, go back and forth. It's that iterative process feeding in between groups. The last group said this, do you think we could get a bit further? What does this mean? Could we really simplify and break this down? And you get this really detailed look then at the types of skills. And how we can then as a research team, and then feeding it back to groups, because it's again this iterative process, not just within groups of people, but also between researchers, their decisions, and the people, the next lot of people in the groups, is we can say, look, we're thinking that it kind of can go into these three sort of thematic areas, that these are the sorts of functions that it's for, and we can check that back with the public. So we can say, we think these types of skills are about using digital devices, programs, and the internet. So those super functional skills. But then there are these other ones that seem to move a little bit beyond that. And actually, what is it enabling you to do? It's enabling you to engage online. Or it's enabling you to manage and monitor your data. So we can sort of start to organise what people are talking about, and hopefully that can be useful to people. And again, on the right-hand side, we have our qualitative sort of quotes, and further to the right-hand side, we've got more survey findings, results, how it compares to what people said you need. So on the next slide, Sim, then we have again, the same for the safety skills. So safety is often about, it's incredibly important, but it's also quite hard to capture sometimes. But they did an excellent job of capturing all these different elements, because so much of feeling safe and confident online is about your knowledge, your awareness, and not just about what you are able to do. But then there are these things that are about what you are able to do. And again, if we're just fixing our attention on the left-hand side, we can start to organise these sorts of skills into skills for managing our security, so that we feel safe and confident online, so we can carry on doing those things that make going online rewarding, hopefully, interacting with others, sharing and receiving information, but doing that safely. So we get to unpick all of that, and we get to have this holistic approach. I'm just checking if there's anything I've missed. So yeah, it just enables us to look into all, not just the things, but the reasons behind those. It gets us to look at what's individual, more at an individual level, and also what is more at a household shared level. And I think that's it. And I think that's onto Sim now. Onto Katherine now.
On to Katherine now.
Yeah.
Thanks. Right. So I'm just going to say a bit about some of the, once we've got this sort of list, the contents of MDLS, what else we could do with that, and what other research. I think one point from the methodology is that when we're developing the lists of things, it's the conversations around what a hypothetical person would need. We're not asking people about their own individual needs. So But what we have done is some qualitative work, interviews, as part of some additional research. It's been funded by the Welsh government because they were interested, they wanted to know a bit more about MDLS in Wales, particular needs, how they may differ. The Scottish government were actually at the moment doing something similar with the Scottish government, and that involved interviews with people, with families in their homes, talking to them about their own individual needs. So that's where, sort of going on to Carrie's question about people knowing what they were missing and so on, this is like about the individual needs there. And these interviews included parents and children as well. We also did some groups with stakeholders. So we were trying to get also at where needs might differ, how they might be different in different household types as well. And the challenges as well, the challenges that people can face in meeting those needs. So I'm just going to draw on a few of that. I think firstly, this work sort of really reiterated the importance of digital access for family life. And I think and going back to the definition as well, it sort of links to the social participation, feeling included, just for everyday life access to services. But bearing in mind, this was about families with children that we started off doing this. So particularly for families with children, interaction with school, young people, their social lives, communicating, it's sort of really important to them. But I think going back to the sort of why question as well that Sim raised was the sort of why digital access can be even more important for people who are already facing challenges. So going back to it's sort of, they need it, but actually there could be really greater implications of not having that, which came up in these as well. So for example, about this access to social security benefits, reporting homelessness, a lot of these things involve digital interaction. I think another point is that it's a starting point, and it was about recognizing where there may be different needs and variation in needs or different ways of meeting MDLS. So one of the groups we did and some of the interviews involved people with health conditions and disabilities. So that's something that we can't account for in the main MDLS, but it's something that we need to recognise that can make a difference. So, for example, things like about specialist software, there's lots of different ways that can come up. Even things that become more important. We had quite a few families, for example, there's children with autism. So that really came up in terms of things like gaming being really important for them. So I think it's recognised that some of the things that may vary in importance or need for depending on people's circumstances. The other thing when we're talking to people about the sort of importance, the impact of meeting or not meeting MDLS, meeting their digital needs, is about low income and affordability. I mean, that is the key barrier, low income, affordability for digital goods and connection. At the time we did these interviews, there was a sort of cost of living crisis, rising living costs, so it was really sort of top of mind for people. But I think it was useful to think about how that came out. So it's in different ways. So it means people, you can't afford the devices, you haven't got what you need, they may not be able to replace them. So the implications of that for your everyday life, but also what's come out is thinking about how you look behind whether someone has a connection. You might at first glance think that they have, but is it fit for purpose? So it goes back to the definition being about adequacy. So I think that's really important to bear in mind. Don't just think, oh, they've got 4 devices, they're fine. Actually, if they don't work, then they're not. Access to the internet as well. It's about people talked about restricting and having to make decisions about restricting their data use, about as individuals, but within families as well. And I think the really important point that came out of this qualitative work was that some people might appear to be meeting their digital needs. And I think this is particularly because this was done with families with children. It was so important for households with children to have their needs met, to be able to be online. But people talked about having to make sacrifices, the parents either sort of having to take on debt to afford a laptop or something, or to keep the internet on, having to borrow money, or going without food to try and do that, because it was so important. And I think it comes back to, it's all very well meeting those digital needs, but at what cost? What if you're not meeting other needs? And that's not okay. So it's sort of going back to digital poverty, but actually there's poverty as well. In the UK, we do have something called social tariffs, which is a low special rates for people on low incomes. There are issues there that we talked about with people. So I think it's useful for exploring that as well. Do you want to just pop on the next slide, Sim? I'm going to just very briefly say something about this, because what I think it might be relevant, because I know Matt was saying about people in more rural areas. And this was one of the areas where there was a sort of thinking that there may be differences in remote and rural areas, I think, particularly in connectivity. So the MDLS we did was a benchmark. It was for people in, the groups were all in urban areas. So yes, we did speak to people in rural areas as well. So I think the key thing here is about the internet speed, quality not being enough, the impact that can have, the cost, because if you have limited providers, people felt that they're not able to negotiate a cost, they're being forced to pay a higher fee. And I think the other thing is it's as one of the stakeholders pointed out, it's more expensive, but actually it's more vital for people in rural areas. So that's something that came out. And I think the other thing is, it's not just rural areas. One other area is which we talked about to stakeholders, but also to someone living in that situation, people living in temporary accommodation. So with people who are asylum seekers, they're often put in a temporary accommodation, could be shared accommodation. You need your digital access to keep appointments with the Home Office or the government and that sort of thing. But actually, they don't have so much internet access and very little income. So I think that's another thing there. I won't go on any longer because I think we're running over time. So
thanks, Katherine.
Sim.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, I think the point we've found with this project and others is that there are very specific rural issues, and they're material and real to do with, is the wire there, is it reliable, and so on. But there are also similar challenges inside urban areas where businesses don't want to put the infrastructure because there isn't a big enough return. Plus, as Katherine was saying, in urban areas, a lot of people in temporary or rented and other accommodation and so on. Are you wanting me to do this slide, Katherine? Because there's a bit of both of us on this one. Shall I just?
I think this is mostly your headlines. Okay,
right. So, I mean, as we've obviously, I think we pointed out, the digital is just essential to family life. As has been pointed out, we started out with households with children. We are in the process of doing other households that don't have children, older and younger at the moment in terms of definitions. But that came out. Poverty, and as we'll show the data in a minute, is just key to all of this. And we talk about digital poverty. People talk about food poverty. Poverty is poverty, but there is a role for digital in this. In both, poverty excludes you from digital access, and digital access makes it harder to address issues of poverty. It's a combined thing, and let's remember that. So the big reveal is that from our definition of what households with children need, our survey is telling us that 45% of UK households with children don't meet our minimum digital living standard. They're either falling down in terms of the equipment they've got. About 20% of them don't have the equipment that is on that list. The skills, either functional or critical, and especially the critical skills. So you have households with low levels of equipment and parents unable or lacking confidence to engage with the school online. That just gives you a kind of an example of what that actually means when we say they're not meeting the minimum digital living standard. And within all of that, the critical skills are the area that all households are weakest on, or overall households are weakest on, but it's an area where people have the most worry, which is their online safety and the online safety of their children. So for us, what this points out is that we think we live in a very, very digital society, but there are a large number of citizens struggling with one or more aspects of this as we hurtle on into our AI and whatever future. If we look at the big picture, there are a lot of places and means by which people are falling behind. And in the UK, that's 3.7 million households are not meeting that standard. If you want the stats, for anybody in the room who's a stats person, so this is some of the stuff we've done here at Liverpool. We took our big survey and we modeled how do you predict whether someone is likely to be above or a household is likely to be above or below the minimum digital living standard. And what we find is it's kind of not rocket science, but, you know, socioeconomic grade, we have a thing in Britain, I don't know whether you use something similar in America, where there's a grading goes from A to E. A is university professor and Elon Musk, and E is someone on long-term benefits or no income. And C1, C2, the bit in the middle are, you know, skilled and unskilled labor, and the D and the B bits are the kind of intermediary points between the upper and lower ends of the scale. What we find is that being of lower socioeconomic grade, living in an area of higher multiple deprivation, mean you're less likely to meet the MDLS as a household. Being a single parent or having a lot of children in the house produces a challenge. Being on benefits, not working, the respondent, so the person who answered the survey for the household, having a health issue, the person who is the respondent from the household not identifying as white, UK kind of white, town size has an effect. Now, interestingly, for us, it's urban areas are worse for meeting MDLS than rural areas. But again, this surveys households with children. It's not all household types, and the demographics of rural and urban are different on that thing. And yet then UK region. So taking all of those other things as a constant, it is still the case that the Northeast, Scotland, Northern Ireland are areas where people are less likely to meet the MDLS. So essentially, if you contrast the similar households between the north and the south of England, they could be 4 times, you know, more likely or less likely to meet the MDLS on similar demographics and so on, or, you know, challenges on employment, etc. So those little vignettes on the right kind of show how that plays out, you know. So a 2-parent household in a wealthy area, everyone working, living in a small town, is like 5 times more likely to meet the MDLS than a 2-parent household, lower socioeconomic grade, with 2 children, receiving benefits, you know, not identifying as white, and so on. So there's quite those intersectionality things that someone asked earlier play out quite notably in this. And just to put it kind of starkly, if we look at socioeconomic grade or indices of poverty in the area in which the respondents live, it's a straight line graph. You know, poverty is poverty, and those in lower socioeconomic circumstances are much less likely to meet the MDLS. And like I said, we did maps. I can put the maps up at some point, or share the link so you can go and look at your favorite bit of the UK and see whether they meet or they don't meet the MDLS. But yes, we've got some mapping that, you know, policymakers can use to look at this. And I think that was our pause point, Matt.
It is. Thank you, Simeon and Chloe and Katherine, for sharing all that information about the findings for a big round of minimum digital living standard research in the UK. Time for some audience questions. If you're listening to this and you would like to know anything about what you just heard, please pop that in the chat. And until we have something coming up there, we can go back to Cheryl's question about the survey that generated this results. What can you tell us about the survey itself? Is it a lot of questions? Was it the same for everyone?
Yeah, I've skimmed over the complexity of building the survey, because technically, if we were to ask everything that is in the definition, we would need a survey with somewhere in the region of 300 questions, you know, with about 100 of those questions being asked by every single member of the household. That's just not feasible. It's just not doable. So we did do that for close to 200 households. And what we did then was we looked at the answers and how they cluster, because, you know, if you don't have one skill, you're also not likely to have some of the other skills and so on. And we looked at which skills and so on. The equipment stuff we kept as is, but for the skills and stuff, we looked at which skills tended to cluster together. And if you didn't have skill X, there was a significant predictor of not having the other skills. So we boiled the skills list down to something shorter. And we also looked at, as you may have seen on the slides, the skills for certain ages. So you don't need to ask certain questions about preschool kids that you do have to ask about secondary school kids. So that allowed us to boil this complexity down to something that could be delivered inside around 40 to 45 minutes in a household and cover all household members. If it's a 5-person household with 2 adults and a visiting grandma, then it was over an hour, but on average about 40 minutes.
Thank you for that. Chloe and Katherine, did you have anything you wanted to add about the survey itself?
No, I think that covered it. Yeah, we had many a team meeting and catch up about the implications of turning the qualitative work into a survey. And I prefer qualitative research for many reasons, and that was one, because it's difficult. It's really difficult to boil it down, but we also appreciate that having the qualitative and the quantitative is really helpful for people, but rather Sim than me.
I mean, the question about. Go on, sorry, Katherine, go.
No, I was going to. Have you got something else on the survey, Sim? Because I was going to come back to Carrie's question.
There's another question about the survey here, which I can answer quite quickly.
Okay. Yeah.
How do we extrapolate survey to the whole UK population? It was a high quality, nationally representative survey from a company. Britain is one of the few places where you can do this, where you can send people out on the streets to people's houses and they will answer survey questions, you know, and so on. Also, we have a vast amount of data from our census on down to like half a postcode, so 10 houses on a street, about the demographics of those 10 houses. So we can kind of, for survey work, you can select those demographics representatively, put people on the ground, say this is part of a street where you expect to see mostly single parents, this age group, whatever, and they can get the target population really. And when we did the geography work to make the maps, when we looked at what area types we'd got, there's some very complicated geodemographics of what area types are like around the UK at that tiny level. The only places we were missing from our survey were places where there weren't kids, right? Or they're very unlikely to be kids. So it was a very good, and the proportions were very good. So it was a very good sample. So that's how we were able to extrapolate to the larger UK population.
Thank you for that. Okay, with a minute or two left before we move on to our final section, my question is around how transferable some of this work might be. It sounds very similar to our experience in Nova Scotia, for example, a lot of the challenges, and I wonder, when you've taken this work into Scotland, I believe, and Wales, and Nova Scotia might be on the same list. How transferable have you found this kind of template or this work to be, so we can maybe save some time and effort and pick up where you left off? What do you think?
Well, I think the MIS people can answer that better, because you've taken MIS outside the UK, so the minimum income standards, which is the template we've built on.
I think the method is certainly transferable. At its core, as Sim says, we've taken our main minimum income standard methodology, which is what this was based on, and used it in places, for example, like Singapore and Mexico, quite different geographical and sort of cultural locations, South Africa even, I think, and that's been sort of used there. So I'm certainly the same could be done with this, using the methodology. In terms of saving time, that's a bit of a different question, because when we've gone to Wales and Scotland, because the work was done and we've got the sort of core MDLS contents lists, those were done across the UK, so we could then take it to Scotland and Wales and talk to people about, is this relevant, is there anything different in there? I think it would be very it wouldn't be something that we would do, is to take that core list to a different country and say, is that the same? So I think you would have to start from scratch with the groups and in establishing what the needs are specifically in whether it's Nova Scotia, Canada or whatever. But I think that would need to be done at that level. But certainly the methodology, we could talk further about using the methodology.
It's also the same, isn't it, Katherine? Even if we did more work in the UK setting again, but there had been that passage of time, I think we would want to go back to that orientation development stage again, and it really, for what it gives you, it's quite a small amount of time. You're going to conduct a lot of focus groups anyway to then say the what is needed, but that getting that definition, you'd want to check that back anyway, even in the UK if time has passed. When
we've done Ms work, they've sort of drawn on what we've done, but it's important that they in different countries have their own definitions, so they've got the ownership over it. It's come from people within that country and in that situation. So I agree.
Matt, you're muted, Matt.
Thanks, Simeon. It's time to move on to our last segment. This is the section that we call "So What?" What to make of this? What's the meaning of all of this anyway? Simeon, why don't you lead? Kick that off.
So beyond this, and I think this is where I'm, unless Katherine and Chloe say otherwise, I think I'm being Emma. So I will try to be Emma. So what does this mean? Well, first off, it's the recognizing the essentialness of digital for families. And with the work we're doing now on other household types, obviously other household types. What we point out, because all of us in this team do an awful lot of work with government, with funding agencies, with charities, whether it's around digital inclusion or income or poverty and so on in different ways. Or, I also do work on misinformation, disinformation, and the kind of those digital literacy things with government. So it's just kind of reiterating how you can't fix this from one place. Access to devices is one thing, educational provision is another, and in the British government, they sit in different boxes, so it's a cross-cutting priority. One of the thing, therefore, is to think about how we produce that more sustainable connectivity for families. A lot of evidence of families coming on and offline, especially those on lower incomes. Some work I'm doing for the moment for the Ofcom, for the media regulator with their own data, shows that 30% of UK households are finding on a monthly basis that they're struggling with their telecoms bills post-COVID. It peaked during COVID and it's not really got better. It's dropped to about 28% now, which means those things around social tariffs, those conversations about the connectivity bit with policymakers are really important. But also the skills stuff. And I think that's the complex bit, is how do you get the skills to kids during education so that they hit 18 with that list, those list of functional and critical skills. But also, again, work I've done with government and the Good Things Foundation do with government is how do you get those skills to adults post-education? How do you get those skills so that the parents can feel confident that they and their children are safe online? So that's how we've been using it for lots of different conversations with policymakers. And one of the things we have done, and it's happening more and more, and Katherine and Chloe and I are with the Home Office on whichever Monday it is, because my brain is fried this week about meeting. There's a Monday coming up shortly where we're meeting the Home Office design teams. So we've talked a lot now to the digital design teams in government, how this gets them to think about where people really are when they're designing services for them, not where they think they are, etc. But also it raises the point that we've been saying for a long time that you can't push the state online, you can't push services online, you can't push culture online. I've done work in that area as well. And it not have a consequence on access and universality and rights for citizens. So it points out specific things, that examples we've already had, you know, support families in temporary accommodation, work with survivors of modern slavery. You know, how do you support them through that horrendous legal process, which is now all digital? You know, how do you make sure when you're rolling out new services, you're not doing that like a health service and then suddenly excluding a lot of the people you need to engage with, because those households are in those lower economic, or those households where there are health issues. You know, and also, you know, digital safety. We've got the online safety bill in Britain. Ofcom, the regulator, is required to engage with what's happening now with Facebook and X and everything, where the safeguards are all being taken off commercially on one half of the planet, but our law and European law says that they will be fined if they don't get that under control. But this also says, you know, two sides to that. We need to make sure that citizens and families have got the skills to keep themselves safe, but it also reiterates the importance of this to families and so on, and how you engage with those issues about those critical skills people need. And as Chloe said, that critical awareness of, is this good information? Should I share it? We've just had these horrendous riots in Britain. I don't know if you know about them. After a horrendous, what has now been defined as a terrorist attack by a young man on a set of children in Southport, there were riots all over the country, anti-immigration, racist riots all over the country, instigated from a small number of social media accounts. You know, so households identify that having those critical skills are important, and it's one of the areas in the MDLS that they fall short on. So again, it's a basis for having that conversation with regulators. And as we've already mentioned, the Welsh government, even before we'd started the project, the Welsh government put out a tender and said, can we have a minimum digital living standards for Wales, please? And we had to go, 1 minute, we haven't even started yet. We did that work in parallel in Wales, sense checking, as Chloe and Katherine have said, what we've done in the UK, rest of the UK with population in Wales, so that Wales can now use it as a policy instrument, and they are doing. Good bit of competition, you know. Scotland now is having a Scottish MDLS. We're doing the same project now in Scotland. Lots of local government organisations are now engaging with this, including Conversation with Local Government Association. But one example, Camden, used it to look at its own staff first. You know, did it think its own staff met this standard? If they didn't, then those staff are then helping people in the community. They need helping kind of first to be able to help the people in the community. And as I just mentioned, service designers in government, if the acceptable minimum is very basic equipment, very basic mobile phone, very basic laptop or tablet, etc., we should be designing for that, so that people who meet that can then be digitally included. Is if we design for needing better equipment or more mobile coverage or whatever, we will be being exclusionary in our design. And lastly, the map books help look at it regionally. And the whole MDLS project has been a collaborative partnership between academia, industry, third sector, and government to develop this. And, you know, that's another power it has. To then directly feed into these different types of policy interventions, you know, at different levels and in different ways. There we go. And so the last little bit is an update. We're doing MDLS Scotland at the moment, halfway through that. We've done MDLS Wales. We've also just finished a bit of work here at Liverpool for Wales, looking at how their approach now sits against the rest of the UK. With the Good Things Foundation led roundtables with Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, which holds the brief now on digital inclusion, to help set the agenda for the new government in Britain. We expect within the next couple of weeks, not a digital inclusion strategy, but a kind of digital inclusion action plan to build towards a strategy in the next few weeks from this government. Haven't had one since 2013 in Britain. The user research stuff I've mentioned, the engagement with the whole range of local government organisations, which again I've mentioned, and we've been feeding the results of MDLS into lots of different organisations, UK and internationally. Nova Scotia's even got a little mention on there at the end, but including even the World Economic Forum, UK parliamentary groups and regulators. And lastly, some of the work we've done most recently is with others who collect data on digital inclusion. That long list that I started the presentation with of different ways of measuring digital inclusion, trying to get all the different people who do those measures in Britain in a room. We've had them in a room now 3 times to talk to each other about greater consistency in thinking about what we measure and how we talk to policymakers. But there you go. I guess that's the whatever. And there is a website. We'll put it in the chat if it's not there already. And you can find all the reports and all the maps. And you can have quite a lot of the reports in Welsh if you're a Welsh speaker as well, because they're there. I think that's it. And here's our little last quote, which is, if you want people to survive in this world, you need food, you need water, and that's your human rights. Now, having connectivity that is usable, affordable, should be on there somewhere, because actually you can't survive in this world, this day and age that we're living in without them, which was one of the quotes that Chloe and Katherine collected. There we go.
Quite true. Thank you, Simeon. I'm going to take a moment and show off the only Gaelic the only Welsh that I know. Defel donka dieri garig, which means persistent tapping breaks the stone, or something along those lines, which is kind of my approach to digital inclusion. We're just going to keep tapping away at it till we crack it open. Thank you for that. Now we're going to spend our last few minutes really opening it up for all of you folks who have been stymied by the fact that you can't say anything. We have changed that feature. If you would like to enter a question on the chat, go ahead. But if you would like to unmute and have an exchange or share something with our panelists, or ask a question, share a comment, what's coming up for you? How might this relate to Nova Scotia? What's on your mind? Let's take advantage of having this group here for a few more minutes and see what people think. Who's going to jump in first? And while we wait for somebody to jump in with a burning question, I'm just going to make an observation similar to what you've described here in Nova Scotia. When GEO Nova Scotia focuses on our 3 pillars of digital inclusion: devices, connectivity, and the skills to use them confidently and safely. The first 2 are often poverty or cost-based, and delivering them and supplying them to people who need them is complicated, but very manageable. If you've got the organizational capacity and you've got the resources, it's just it's a process. Skills, digital skills, especially for people who are out of the system, is complex. It is unique to every single individual. There is no system to just make it happen. How we learn, what we learn, who we're willing to learn it from, when and where, is as unique as each one of us. And that is, in some ways, a far more challenging, but just as critical element to this whole piece. And I wonder if you or anyone else in the room wants to reflect on that.
I'd just say that's our feeling here.
Yeah, we found it interesting that there seems to be some kind of link, of course, which makes sense, that actually if you don't have regular access to the equipment, perhaps because of issues around affordability, also skills are more likely to be down because, of course, less exposure, less use. But equally, something that I don't think I forgot to mention when I was doing my bit was we had this starting point of households with children, but actually we've expanded recently. So what we're in the midst of at the moment as well is not just MDLS Scotland looking at households with children. We're also talking to people in who are pension age, working age people, no kids. So actually what we're noticing is that there might be, from these discussions, we were talking to pension age people. And they were talking about how there'll be other reasons why you don't practice your skills, because actually there might be an issue around whether you have your own device or not. We're still exploring that. There's just so many things. It's not just I'm an older person, and therefore it could be how you share the equipment in your household. Yeah, like you say, it's very, very complicated skills as to why people, like, how do you get them there? But also, how do you measure it? Because it's usually through self-reporting and things like that. It's very, very difficult when it comes to skills.
I think what's come up in the groups when we've talked to people about where you might get your skills or knowledge, really, knowledge about, particularly about safety, is there seems to be a whole plethora of various different stakeholders, information from all different places. And one, people maybe don't know about it, but it's like, where do they start? They don't know what to trust. There doesn't seem to be a sort of central one-stop shop type thing, which people just, it sounds simple, but people said just a one-stop shop where we can got reliable, trustworthy information. That's what would be really helpful. But there doesn't seem to be. There's lots of pockets of amazing things going on, but a lot of them very localized, or people in certain circumstances might qualify for it or not. So I think there's just seems to be gaps. So, but
definitely
it's not,
a
that's
challenge.
not unique to digital support. That's all the research we've done is about various different sources of support. But yeah.
We've certainly seen the challenge and benefit of just signposting, of just trying to give people, direct them to trusted resources. Because most of us now, if we're trying to learn something, where do we go? We Google it. And especially more recently, you can get 5 pages of garbage, and how do you know what to look at and what to follow through on? You want somebody else, somebody you know and trust, to say, go here, or you can trust
Exactly.
this Good Things Foundation doing the learn. Carrie, you've got a question. You got your hand up. Jump in.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Thanks for the presentation, folks. It's really wonderful to see hear about what you've learned that you can teach us. So thank you for that. And just wondering if you could comment on the use of stories. I know you said earlier some of you love qualitative work more than quantitative work, and I think they're complementary, of course. And so we're doing some work right now to collect stories from people that are participants in GEO, get devices and internet access through GEO. And some of the stories about the impact of being able to get online on their lives are absolutely gobsmacking. They take your breath away sometimes, things you can't imagine that help literally save people's lives. So I'm just thinking, are you using stories in your illustrations at all of how important it is to have a minimum standard of digital living?
I think that the qualitative work we've done has really enhanced the understanding about the importance of it, the impact of having, or especially not having it. And that's with actually very few interviews we did with households in Wales. When we did the work, we initially put in, I'd have liked to do a whole section of qualitative work, but they wouldn't fund that. So we've done some, because Wales came on board, and part of that was just a few qualitative interviews, but we have used those endlessly. I mean, that wonderful quote came from a lady I spoke to in Wales who was a carer for an autistic son and a kinship carer, so she's looking after a grandson, and it's so eloquent. The people themselves, how they put things in their own words about what's really important to them. I think it's really, really valuable. But yeah, I think it brings it home.
Yeah, it can really help a policymaker or decision makers or anybody really, but it help people to see what it looks like in real life to be without internet access.
This is where we need Emma, because part and parcel of what Good Things do is put those stories in front of. Because of course they support this network of several thousand local organizations who are delivering digital inclusion, whether they're libraries or sort of women's refuge or a like literally corner shop type things, places where people go where they offer these services through some organization, and they provide them free access to the training materials, free access to the information resources and so on they can use to deliver that, and the data banks and so on, they collect those stories all the time. You know, that is kind of their stock for doing that. And you know, you can really see the power of it. I mean, I've done a lot of work with Greater Manchester, which is now a mostly devolved large region in the UK, with the mayor of Greater Manchester. And one of the stories that came out of the work there was basically of a guy stuck at home doing nothing, his health deteriorating, whatever, finally getting kind of dragged out by a friend to go to this course. And once he'd engaged, and now he could talk to friends and find old friends, and he was engaging with his hobbies again, and he talked about, it saved my life.
Yeah.
I've just faded away in the house. And especially when COVID hit, suddenly I could do stuff. I could stay with people. I could talk to people. And you listen to those stories, you know, the stuff we did with the survivors of modern slavery, the one that always gets to me, you know, saying to Katherine about stories that you always tell. You know, we talked to one of the sort of stories we got was a woman survivor of modern slavery. I leave it up to you to understand what type of circumstance a woman dragged into slavery in the UK was in, had a young child, was now kind of going through the process of having been taken away from those circumstances, being supported, etc., and was given an iPad. And the thing that they declared was most important to them was that their child could now watch content, children's television content, and so was not bullied at school. And that was the value of that device, not the lawyer, not the government site, but their child now being able to integrate. You know.
Yeah, we hear that a lot. You know, children are expected to have this, and you get singled out if you don't. We have a very limited amount of time left. Steph, you've put your hand up. I'd love to hear your voice. Why don't you jump in with a question?
Yeah, what I'm hearing is like, we're getting all this information about what people have or what they don't have, and sort of riffing off what Carrie mentioned earlier of like people not connected and knowing what they're missing. It's like, what have you found to be like sort of those main like hubs of trust that people are connecting with to find out, either like for, you know, educate themselves like with digital literacy or critical thinking with like digital, or even just to know what they're missing in the first place? You've mentioned a few things, but I was just sort of wondering like, what have been your top ones?
Just to jump in on that, on that space, because we do a lot of work on digital literacies here. You know, we talk about networks of digital literacy, and the primary network for an awful lot of people is friends and family. You know, it's friends and family, etc., who provide that nexus. And it's classic, for those who are sociologists, it's classic social capital. So, you know, if the people you know in your network are IT professionals, that's one level of help. If the people you know in your network is your grandson, you know, or the neighbor next door, it's a different level of help. You know, and on a completely different project funded by the same people by Nuffield, looking at people's awareness of kind of what happens with their data and so on, and their risks, etc., we found an awful lot of young people with really low levels of understanding of those things, depending on each other to assess what was good and bad to be engaged with, etc., what was acceptable content and so on. And, you know, it was the blind leading the blind, right? So that's, I mean, and this is the point Matt was saying, that the interventions for skills and knowledge for people post-education is really, really challenging. And I think that's a key one. Yeah. I mean, I think I don't know if Chloe and Katherine want to jump in on this. I think the power of the method is, and having seen it used, has been that you ask people to hypothetically say what's the minimum a standard British family needs. People who don't have that and people who do have more than that can sit in a room and talk to each other and come to a very rational consensus about where that minimum line is, below which things start to go wrong. So it's not a minimum like a food bank. You know, if it was food, it's not a food bank, it's an adequate diet, right? It's an adequate diet below which you would start to suffer ill health or whatever. So for digital, it's an adequate skills and kit such that without that, something will start to not work. And so they were fantastic at coming to that consensus.
So it's deliberative So it has a key function that I can't go into, but they deliberate. There's a purpose to the group, and it's about reaching consensus despite there being all these different preferences and to some degree different levels of engagement. Certainly, it's hard to recruit people for this kind of research who are completely disengaged. Although we did do a little bit of that with the orientation development stage, but certainly we were aiming to get people with different degrees of engagement or use, and then from those different points of view, making a decision for a fictitious household. We use vignettes or a fictitious case. So it helps them to reach a common ground and a decision in the middle, but they are very much coming from these different points. And yet, despite that difference, they can make an agreement. And that's kind of part and parcel of what's great about the method. Yeah. But we're running out of time, so I can't
Yeah,
go
we
into
can.
anymore.
I'm going to have to jump in. I would like to give our guests one last moment. We'll go around quickly. Any final words, thoughts, or advice for us in Nova Scotia before we send you off to dinner? You're 4 hours ahead of us, so you must be hungry. Chloe, any final thoughts?
My thought is just a reflection on this, being able to get together with people in Nova Scotia. It's fantastic. It's good to be able to talk about MDLS in a different context.
Yeah,
Thank
maybe
you.
there's an exchange trip in the future. Katherine?
Well, likewise, I think it's been great. It's been really great to be able to talk about it with people in a different country. And, there's certainly we can talk again about if anyone's interested in taking it forward or any elements, we'd be more than happy to do so. So please get in touch.
Thanks, Katherine. Final word for you, Simeon?
Just to reiterate those points, it's great for you to have spent the time today to listen to us, giving up your time to listen to us. So thank you very much for that. I hope it's been useful. Yes, we are very happy to talk to others about how this might be used in other parts of the world, or how it might affect, work with your thinking. And we have said if people want us to come and present this or a little short version of this or something to groups that you're working with that might find it useful, just let us know. Part of the point of the work and the funding was to engage. And yes, any opportunities to link up and have a trip across the pond, no matter how
Trip to
cold
Nova Scotia, yeah.
Nova Scotia might be, that would be fantastic. You can always welcome Britain too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, here we go. Thank you all again so much. Thank you to our generous panelists and guests for being here today. Thank you all for your time. Keep an eye out for an email headed your way soon with a feedback survey about our time today and a link to Carrie's recently launched Learning and Evaluation blog where we can continue a conversation that we started today. Thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.